Patriots, rebels, outlaws, and pirates. If there was ever collusion in this country for nefarious purposes, it is the elimination of free speech by the leftist Marxists. The coordination between government, big tech, and large corporations and organizations to silence any opposition to their totalitarian agenda is on full display. Why? Because the leftist agenda cannot tolerate dissent if it's to be successful. Now that the coup has been accomplished, they will do what all totalitarians do when they seize power: control the media, silence opposition. This control has been made so much easier now that the plandemic has forced even more activity than before online, where it can be watched and monitored. Everything is now done online: commerce, work, school, even most of our social interaction. We have become so very dependent on the internet, and as we have found out, that internet is controlled by a select few, and those few support the leftist, anti-liberty, and anti-free speech agenda. Their power was quickly demonstrated by the fact that they prohibited the President of the United States from communicating with the American people. The fact is that the government does not have to pass a law banning free speech if we self-regulate out of fear of being denied our primary mode of commercial and social interaction. And that denial, as we know, is very real. Sure, having your personal account frozen or deleted by Facebook or Twitter is bad, but there are a lot of people losing their businesses because they were dependent on these platforms, and there is no redress. But what happened to President Trump's campaign site and to Parler is even more chilling. Stripe Incorporated said it will no longer process payments for the president's campaign website. Now, Stripe handles card payments for millions of online businesses and e-commerce platforms, perhaps for your business. The ability of these payment processing platforms, and I will include the big banks, Visa, MasterCard, and others in this, to simply kick an individual or a business off their service with no warning and no redress, and with few other options available, it's devastating. E-commerce has become the way businesses grow, and in the era of COVID, survive. Trump, of course, wasn't the first. The big banks and the credit card companies have already shown they will stop doing business with non-politically correct businesses like gun manufacturers or sellers. Who's going to speak out when their livelihood can be cut off with the stroke of a key? What happened to Parler is even worse. If Facebook and Twitter and Stripe are going to discriminate against freedom-loving citizens, well then, as the entrepreneurial folks that we are, we would simply start our own platforms and services. Parler demonstrated that that is not a simple option. Twitter, Parler's main competitor, Apple and Amazon colluded to destroy Parler by eliminating a huge part of their distribution and then simply wiping them off the internet. The Apple and Google app stores are the primary way a lot of businesses make it easy for their customers to access their services, and there are currently no other real viable options. For them to discriminate in this way is disastrous for any business depending on that kind of distribution. But what Amazon did by denying Parler server space is on a whole other level of destruction. You may not know this, but Amazon and Google provide just about all the server space for what goes on the internet. If you have a website, it's probably on Amazon servers, and if not, Google's. That they could arbitrarily and suddenly just deny server space to anyone they choose would be devastating for many businesses. The chaos of having your internet presence disappear overnight with no recourse. Well, you can just imagine. How many small businesses have the resources to sue? And even if they do, by the time such lawsuits wind their way through the courts, is there going to be a business left? Again, who is going to risk it? And sure, you could get your own servers, but that is an expensive proposition. And these days, who can afford that? Which brings us to our next point, the destruction of the middle class. Now, how is this related? We all know money is political power. The left knows this better than anyone. Everything that has happened with the COVID lockdowns has been directed to destroy the middle class, entrepreneurs, the people who work. Small businesses are closed while large corporations are allowed to continue operating. Why? To impoverish the very people who support populist candidates like President Trump. If we have no money to donate, few candidates for office are going to be able to stand up against all the money that corporations in Hollywood use to support the left. And if we have no money, we will not be able to fight those huge corporations in court, nor develop a parallel economy that will allow us to continue our lives outside of their totalitarian control. Do you see the corner these corporations have put us in? The control they have, the ability to intimidate people by threatening their livelihood. Economic freedom is political freedom. And these corporations are destroying our economic freedom and so stifling our free speech and eliminating our political freedom. Of course, we cannot forget the intimidation offered by the cancel culture facilitated by social media. We are currently in a burgeoning purge of anyone who had the audacity to support President Trump or a liberty agenda. People who have been at his rallies have lost their jobs. Anyone who served in his administration is being blacklisted. One glaring example is the National Association of Realtors, of all people, spying on its members' social media for any hint of politically incorrect speech, i.e. hate speech, in order to discipline or remove such deplorables from their organization. And getting back to the internet giants for a moment, we can't forget how they simply remove voices that do not fit the narrative of the left, or really any speech they don't approve of. In October, Zoom, Facebook, and Twitter all shut down an open academic webinar hosted by a Palestinian activist. This war on academic and scientific debate has been most obvious in the silencing of any physician or scientist who dare to oppose the revered Dr. Fauci and the government line on coronavirus. Do you see what's happening? There is a coordinated effort among all these players to create a totalitarian reality where dissent is eliminated, and the government did not have to pass a single law. This politically correct culture, still run by a small minority, is being accepted by the majority, and that minority is given power primarily through social and corporate media. Now, some of us give in reluctantly, some through cowardice, and too many because they don't even know there is an alternative because it doesn't occur to them. They've never heard it. While comparisons to Nazi Germany are usually overblown, there are too many parallels here to ignore. We have had digital book burnings, and other books, even classics, are being rewritten to make them acceptable to the new woke culture. We don't need armbands to show our allegiance and obedience. We have face masks. Our history is being destroyed and rewritten. The worst part about it is that we're doing it to ourselves. No government law or regulation has forced this upon us. The majority compliance with this intolerant minority is what put us here. Now, that doesn't mean the government is not active in silencing dissent. Every totalitarian regime, in addition to a cultural revolution, needs to demonstrate its power over the opposition. And what demonstrates their power better than a show trial? Persecution cloaked in legal legitimacy. Criminalization of the opposition. The second impeachment of President Trump is a perfect example of this. The fact that they came after his supporters and even administration officials like Michael Flynn, persecuting, prosecuting, and bankrupting them on trumped-up charges demonstrates their vindictiveness. This is what happens in communist countries. And this vindictiveness is now being expanded to include his supporters, you and I. They are redefining what opposition means to further weaponize the Justice Department. If you question the integrity of the election, that's now sedition. Patriotism and love of country, insurrection. I have heard that some, even on the conservative side, are calling the people who entered the Capitol domestic terrorists. Now, it looks like a few may have been, those who planned nefarious actions well before the protest. But we had better be very careful with that label. Individuals affixed with that designation have no rights and get thrown into a hole never to be heard from again. And then, of course, there are the actions of the women in Congress. Nancy is pushing election reform, which will not only legalize all the methods of cheating Democrats have perfected over the years, but will criminalize speech that the government believes is discouraging to voters. That could mean anything. And then you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her commission to do something about all the disinformation on the internet. Well, I can tell you this, disinformation to her is anything that might question her opinion or worldview. Others want to expand hate crimes legislation to include criminalizing any offensive speech. You have a number of members calling for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and others are demanding more open and nefarious revenge against all those who supported President Trump. This is what happens in totalitarian regimes. The opposition is isolated, ghettoized, persecuted, prosecuted, locked up, and eventually murdered. This is where we are in America. Half the country has been labeled enemies of the state to the current government. An administration is about to take power that acquired that power through force and fraud. And in order to install these illegitimate rulers, 15,000 troops will surround the inauguration to protect them from the people they are about to terrorize. The voices of opposition are being silenced. If we simply sit back and accept this occupation as normal, as just another electoral loss in the constant ebb and flow of losses and wins, our country will be gone. We will enter Joe's dark winter of Soviet-style totalitarianism, where the only truth is the government's truth, and dissent is eliminated.